I was right. That is my reaction. That is, simply put, my initial reaction to the Pittsburgh Steelers pulling the trigger and trading George Pickens. And while that might be an annoying reaction and might come across arrogant to some of you, and yes, maybe arrogance is a quality that I sometimes possess, but we all do when we're right and when others are saying you're going to be wrong or throwing it in your face after it didn't happen after the NFL draft, which we'll get into. But nonetheless, facts are facts. And on this, I was right. I'm wrong sometimes, just as all of you are. But on this, on George Pickens, days in Pittsburgh being numbered, which I said the moment they brought in DK Metcalf was inevitable. I was even saying before they brought in DK Metcalf, I was even saying last season when instead of stepping up and having his biggest year, which maybe then would have got him the money that came to DK Metcalf, he had an inconsistent season, a rough end, and drama was there yet again. This is another episode of Mic Drop, made possible by the Believe Network and available everywhere you get your podcasts and, of course, on Sirius XM. I am Mike Asti, and once again, in terms of George Pickens leaving the Pittsburgh Steelers, his Steelers departure, and the Steelers shipping him off, I was right. Now, to unpack this, the Steelers trade George Pickens for a third round pick swaps. I do think this would have made sense to do during the draft when national reporters, Diana Rossini, for one, who's usually on top of her game and certainly in the know, was saying it was likely to occur. And I believed her, and it didn't happen then. So on that, I was wrong. It did not happen during the draft. But it did happen, and it was always going to happen. And as has now been said, since the news broke, and this is hours after here on the same Wednesday morning, a midweek, breaking news major story for Pittsburgh, for the Steelers, for the NFL world that was in a bit of a lull post draft and still waiting for Aaron Rodgers. Of course, we'll get into that. That this was inevitable once they brought in DK Metcalf because they're not going to pay big money for two wide receivers. It's very uncommon in the NFL. And yes, some franchises have done it. The Cincinnati Bengals are one, but they're very much in win now. They kind of had to do so. And there are a couple others, but it hasn't worked out for them. The Steelers never do it, and they weren't going to do it. They always feel they can draft and bring in new receivers. Once a receiver becomes more of a problem than what their production garners, they then are interested in being done with that receiver. And of course, it's hard to paint with a broad brush over the last 15 years. Omar Khan now in there. Kevin Colbert was in there before. It's different regimes. Still Mike Tomlin, of course, as head coach, which is a show for another day that I've discussed ad nauseum. And certainly still the Rooney family running the show, at least ownership wise. But there is a long history of drafting receivers, getting production out of them, having them be quality receivers, and then eventually cutting bait. Different scenarios, different exchanges. I'll throw it out to my colleague Chris Carter with the Post Gazette. He threw it out there, and it's true that oddly enough, the last decade plus, the Chase Claypool trade got the most in return. And when you're talking about Santonio Holmes, who wins you a Super Bowl, when you're talking about Antonio Brown, that despite his off the field antics on the field, is a future Hall of Famer and deserving of that. Even going back before Holmes with Plexico Burris, the list goes on and on. Manuel Sanders, Mike Wallace. Chase Claypool gets the most in return. And now, of course, George Pickens, Juju Smith-Schuster, who they didn't want to give big money to, either letting players go or eventually trading them. That's been the Steelers' way with wide receivers. And yes, this does hamper the offense right now. I never thought the Steelers were going to contend for a championship this year, even with Pickens, whether they bring in Rodgers or not. And that does make it even more of a truth, depending on what other move maybe they will make here on our instant reaction. And Dan Orlovsky, who I hope to have on a show actually here in the future, kind of conversations about that possibly happening. He hit the nail on the head. The Steelers have, you know, one of the least scary offenses in the NFL right now. And there is a reason why they're likely going to take an even further step back offensively. And Arthur Smith now maybe kind of has what he wants, but they're even less explosive. And I get all of that. And that's been a problem in recent years. But once they brought in DK Metcalf, who they didn't have last year, of course, and he is a potential big play veteran receiver. He's not, a guarantee 1,500 yards a year, although he's had big seasons, but he's very, very consistent. He has the size, he has the athleticism. He will help quarterbacks, whoever it is, and bail them out at times. And he can make big plays, and he's won before. He's a veteran. He's a constant pro as well. He's not going to show up late like George Pickens did. He's not going to only work on Randy Moss type highlight catches in training camp. No, he'll work on the route tree too. He's not going to pout. He's not going to throw his helmet on the sideline. Yes, I get why the wide receiver position is a diva position, because they rely on somebody else to have success. That's why it's innately in that. I get the frustration. If a quarterback sucks and you don't get your numbers, you won't get your money, you won't win, you won't get the recognition. I get all of that, but still he won't do it. You'd rather have somebody not doing it. A lot of the Steelers' successful receivers who they then cast off were doing all of that, and then eventually they cast them off. And it's weird to get the most for Chase Claypool, although you can say the Bears kind of messed that up because he didn't work out for them either. But the reason why the Steelers didn't get all these returns that people would want, this first-round pick for Pickens, the first-round pick for AB when he was the best in the game, is because they became more of a problem than their production suggested. And AB may have had something left in the tank, of course. He did, have something left with Brady eventually getting to Tampa and winning there, although he wasn't the best receiver in the game at that point for sure. He never was what he was with Pittsburgh afterwards, at least individually. But George Pickens has been very inconsistent. Again, the off the field antics that I brought up there, the DK is not going to provide you, were part of it too, and they were done. So I was right, and the Steelers eventually do part ways with George Pickens. Again, Mike Asti here, Mike Drop on Believe and Sirius XM. And I can see the comment that some are making of, oh, they should have done this in the draft, they would have got a larger haul, because as I'm saying, you're just not going to get a lot when you are shipping off a wide receiver who has off the field antics. He doesn't have off the field accusations. He's not been accused of anything, harkening back to the AB conversation. He's not had any criminal instances, but he was thought of as a character issue in college, which is why he slid in the draft a little bit, why the Steelers could take him. And at the time, it seemed like, okay, big talent, try. And big talent was there. I thought he would step up last year and have his biggest season of his career. He had his worst season, certainly on and off the field, certainly inconsistent at the very, very least, even though big plays are there. I told a friend who's a Cowboys fan, expect big plays, but also expect him to blow a route and cause an interception. Expect a headache there. And, we'll get into the other side of this too in a bit. Maybe he'll step up in Dallas and have that big year, explode like his talent suggests he can, because he will play with a better quarterback than he's had in Dak Prescott. He will have a better offensive line there. But if he posts some cryptic message on Instagram, it's going to blow up even more in Big D, in Dallas. The national media will make sure of it, and certainly the media there will make sure of it. We covered it in Pittsburgh, but it's going to be that much more in Dallas, win or lose, and especially even if you lose. So it's going to be more of a thing. Is he going to be there long term? A major question mark. Do they want to throw big money? Obviously, Jerry Jones is known as kind of being cheap in recent years, certainly the recent decades, even if you thought maybe he was a big spender back in the 90s. That's not the Jerry Jones currently. So we'll see. They are a much better team now. They are more of a contender now. They have the two wide receivers the Steelers wanted to dream of, and maybe the Steelers will do something, but in all reality, 2025 is not where it's at for the Steelers. They never do this. They're not going to admit. They're not going to tank. They're not going to punt a year. But Omar Khan's doing this more than Kevin Colbert ever thought of. And Colbert, they won big. He's borderline Hall of Fame executive for sure. That 2022 draft certainly looks bad with Pickett and Pickens and some swings and misses there. But Connor Hayward maybe being the best, and obviously that was a late round, kind of flyer for his brother, and he's had some moments, but like that draft is basically a waste, and that sucks. Colbert's last draft, he vocally said he wanted to help them build in his last draft, and It was a swing and miss there at the end, but he does have the rings in his finger and did have the success way back at this point, but still there for him that doesn't go away. But Omar Khan's different, and it appears that he's willing to stockpile, even if maybe he should have got more for Pickens, because no one can dispute the value is not great, but that's just what it is and was going to be what it is for an inconsistent kind of head case wide receiver. But kind of stockpiling a little bit, not early round, but just in general to do whatever. Maybe tinker, maybe work another trade, try to figure things out. Maybe if they have a real bad year and finally have a losing season, they'll be benefited and have an earlier spot. But the draft is going to be in Pittsburgh in 2026. It's going to be a wild scene in the Steel City. You're going to have a backdrop of the rivers. Pittsburgh, when it's warm. When it's warm, it's a great city for sure. Certainly spring and summer. Maybe it won't rain that day. Stadiums there, bridges, a lot of festivals in the summer that will follow. Pittsburgh's one of the most underrated cities when the weather is warm, for sure. I will live on that hill, and I will die on that hill, and I will stand by that. And the draft coming to Pittsburgh is a great thing for the city, for sure. But now maybe it'll be that moment and that scenery and that backdrop of them finally getting their quarterback of the future, finally getting that replacement for the next era after Big Ben. Because the end of Ben, the Mason Rudolph, who's now back and maybe serviceable as a backup for sure, not going to win you a title. The Mitch Trubisky's, the Kenny Pickett's, that draft pick didn't work, despite it being a polarizing conversation. Even the stopgap 1 year Russell Wilson, Justin Fields didn't work. They weren't going to be the next decade for the Steelers. It just was never going to be the case. It's hard to find that guy. Will Howard was a late round pick, obviously won a lot in college, experienced multiple Power Four conferences. Maybe you believe in him, but well, certainly I don't know, a stacked Ohio State team when he won a natty. Kansas State, he won, but didn't win as big. We'll see. It's a wait and see. I have no problem with the draft pick. Makes sense to do it then. Do I think he's the next guy, future Hall of Famer, or the guy after Ben? No. So we'll wait and see if that is the case or if they get their guy in the 2026 draft. We'll see if Will Howard plays this coming season, the situation there, what Mason Rudolph does. He's still young, was a third round pick. There was talent there. He put up big numbers in college as well. But is he likely to all of a sudden be that guy that you can win a title with? Hard to believe. He's won games. He's been a serviceable backup. I think some fans hate him more than they should. He certainly was better than Duck Hodges in that 19 season that people just love Duck. The numbers all across the board were better for Mason Rudolph. And he's certainly won and got better than even that year, which wasn't great for him since then. But he's not likely to, be in Canton someday by any means. And certainly could, jury is still out. Certainly could get you a good game or not. So more than 5 starts for him, jury is still out. We'll see. Keep it 5 or 6. Maybe he can be serviceable during that time, but right now he's the guy. We'll get to also maybe what they should do for this season in a bit as well. But initial reaction here, had to do something, had to bring it to you live, had to be it just me, although I'm going to bring guests on, get more of those here. Personal life's been busy, the professional career has been busy, but this is part of it, and definitely wanted to get something here on the Pickens trade because, again, the theme of the show, I was right. So if you don't like Mike Asti being right or when he's right, this show might not be for you, even though if you're hearing this, you're in the middle of listening. Again, Mike Drop, available everywhere you get your podcast, Believe, and on SiriusXM. So I get the annoyance with the return. It is odd to have Chase Claypool bring you so much more. That shouldn't have been the case, but hey, the Bears are the Bears. And he was, a talented receiver, a big body, and he had that great rookie season. But, nonetheless, George Pickens has tons of talent. There's a reason why he was available for them in the draft. He was inconsistent, and he was a bit of an annoyance. No, he wasn't Antonio Brown. He wasn't accused of anything. He didn't throw furniture off a balcony, almost kill a baby. AB did that. He's not Antonio Brown by any means. But once they brought in DK Metcalf, the writing was on the wall. And you could even tell with George Pickens and, comments, Instagram posts, little rumblings, little rumors, little workout with CD Lamb. He knew. I'm not saying he knew Dallas. Maybe he did. Maybe he should have broke this news. But he knew. He knew that the writing was on the wall. They're not going to pay big money to 2 receivers, and they probably should not when you think about it. They can get a receiver. There's always receivers available in the draft. They probably should have drafted a receiver. I agree. They should have taken a receiver. They maybe should have done this during the draft. They should have tried to maybe replace him with a younger, cheaper guy that has talent in the draft, like they did when they got him in 2022, trying to kind of replace the previous cast-offs. So I totally get that. They maybe have messed up the future of the receiver position. Granted, they have DK Metcalf there that they're comfortable with. There wasn't enough depth there last year, but whether it's Aaron Rodgers, if they do bring in Kirk Cousins, who I think is a smarter move, again, I'll get there, or Mason Rudolph or whoever, Will Howard steps up, they're not going to compete with the Joe Burrows, the Lamar Jacksons of the world in their division, let alone the quarterbacks in the conference and then in the NFL. Even if Aaron Rodgers comes in at 41, a shell of his MVP self, even if he plays like he did at the end of the of last Jets season, his Jets tenure, and it was a little better than before. His numbers were better than what they had before, despite not winning. He's not leading you to the AFC title game or anything wild like Jets fans dreamed of him doing for them. That's not reality. So this might actually be what some Steeler fans have wanted, and I've even called for, that they probably should punt the 2025 season, set themselves up for the future, and then figure it out, even though it's one more year without a playoff win and continues that streak, and that would suck for fans. But that's probably the smart thing and what they really should do and what will happen anyway, even though they won't verbally admit that and Tomlin won't speak like that. But they're not really going to contend this year and weren't probably prior to this anyway, but they now do ship off George Pickens. So I get the value talk. I get they should have drafted a receiver talk. I get the replacement's not there. I get the annoyance by some fans for sure, but you're going to probably like and fall in love with DK Metcalf. And again, they weren't going to pay big money to two receivers. If they really were in win now mode and they really had a chance to go for it, then maybe you do argue you keep Pickens for one more year. You try to get him to improve his off the field and kind of have a maturation process mentally under a veteran like DK Metcalf, who's sound in that regard, and then worry about it after, even if you're still not going to pay him. Obviously, Najee Harris also walks, and that's a question mark there. But that's why maybe you don't draft a receiver in the early first round, because you don't usually sign them to a second deal. He got a lot of production. They didn't win enough, and receivers or running backs, receivers can last a long time, and you can always get them. Running backs, they don't have a long shelf life. If you're Saquon Barkley, sure, because he's a beast and a Hall of Famer. If you're Najee Harris, the numbers are there. The averages weren't. The winning was not. Polarizing tenure, even though maybe underrated. He had some production, a really nice guy too. No problem off the field, but that was never going to be a second deal. So you're drafting somebody for 1 year, one deal, and not the second deal in a short-term situation for a short shelf life position. That goes back to a Pittsburgh media debate from 4 years ago. I do see I have some comments here since this is a live edition of the show. Chase Claypool fall off needs to be studied there from Cole. Yeah, I mean, it is maybe something that could be some minor movie that maybe only Pittsburgh fans would care about, but maybe Bears fans would too. Maybe Dolphins fans would. It's wild. I think that people don't get how good he was in that rookie year, or at least that 4 or 5 game period for sure, when he really exploded and was a playmaking beast. He seemed to be an underrated addition of that draft. And to be fair to the Steelers, again, everyone was singing the praises of bringing in Chase Claypool in that draft for sure. He really seemed to fit. He really seemed to give you a different type of receiver than what the Steelers have really had. And yeah, everything seemed to be working out until it didn't, until kind of mentally it collapsed, until the production was no longer there. And then once he's moved, you could try to argue, if you want to be a Claypool defender, that he was never in a good situation after Pittsburgh, and those franchises were a mess. But yeah, I mean, for him to bring in the best return despite the situations and the production and just who those other receivers were that the Steelers cast off in the last decade plus is just a really, really, really weird fact that exists. And Chase Claypool, the Canadian sensation, it's a flash in the memory of Steeler fans from that season, a very, very odd scenario. But getting a second for him, I mean, especially where he was at that point, at the time, seemed like a fleece and ended up being more than that. Ended up certainly being a steal. So didn't lead to Steeler titles after that, but for sure that did not work out with Chase Claypool. His post Steelers career is very bizarre, and you wouldn't have thought it would just completely crash and burn the way it did, although the Steelers were thrilled to get that second pick. Um, do you think the Steelers get Davis now that he's on the market? They're going to maybe try to do something receiver wise, try to do something in general to help this offense because, again, to quote Dan Orlovsky, it's the least scary offense in the NFL right now, and that's very, very true. Question marks in the running game, offensive line, always a question mark. Quarterback, a major question mark. Receiver depth, not there. Pat Freiermuth is great as a tight end, but is he the best tight end in the league? Is he an all-pro? Is he an elite tight end receiver that can truly elevate and get 1,000 yards? No, that hasn't been proven. Will he become that? Maybe, but they need actual legit receivers around him and more than just one guy in DK Metcalf. He's going to obviously command a lot of double coverage. So I saw it going to Orlovsky again. He actually brought up trying for Brandon Ayuk one more time because everyone knew they tried for him in the past. Allen Lazard is one that is for sure somebody that people should be watching. And before we're done with the show, might be a Pittsburgh Steeler. If they're getting Aaron Rodgers, which is still an if as we're talking, then Allen Lazard is 100% who to look at. This is what the Jets did. This is a guy that Aaron Rodgers feels comfortable with. I'm not saying that's a game changer, but at least gives you somebody with DK Metcalf who's been around the league, that's been productive, who's a veteran, and certainly would know Aaron Rodgers if he's the QB. So that is for sure. Allen Lazard is somebody that if I had to bet money right now, gun to my head, I would say he's a Pittsburgh Steeler, unless they got, assurance that Aaron Rodgers doesn't want to come. Then who the hell knows? I'm not sure the Steelers know what they are doing. So it's fair to say that. I'm not saying the Steelers are in a good situation at all right now. This franchise is not going to contend this season. This is a situation that's worse off than it was a year earlier when they were going into the year and people were saying they weren't really going to make a run. I get that thinking. I think the only way they know what they're doing is if they do have the knowledge of one way or another from Aaron Rodgers, and some are saying that, and that certainly could be the case. It makes sense that they would have that knowledge from Aaron Rodgers, and he could change his mind. He's Aaron freaking Rodgers. You can't believe anything he's going to say, and now people are saying he's leaning towards retirement, and I would totally believe that could happen. Wouldn't shock me. I maybe would do that if I were him, honestly. I maybe advise it rather than deal with the Steelers mess. Certainly, they're not more of an attractive destination now without Pickens than they were with him, for sure. Or than without Najee Harris than they would have been with him, for sure. If you're Aaron Rodgers looking at this, now I don't know where else he would go. The Vikings aren't going to do it, but hell, I mean, believe in Aaron Rodgers at his word, or some quick text that he sends, or a phone call you have before the draft, that's risky gamble. And that maybe is very much what the Steelers have done. Outside of that, though, it very much could also be a scenario where in their mind, Omar Khan's thinking, if Aaron Rodgers changes his mind and doesn't come, okay, then hey, next year we'll try to get the QB. We'll build after next year. We have a lot that we need. We weren't going to win this year anyway. This is a long-term project, a long-term rebuild. Fans have been wanting it for a while. We're not going to say it to the public, but that's really what's going down and what Omar Khan's thinking. If that's the case, then that's what I would advise. That would be smart, and that maybe would make some sense. Is that happening? Maybe only Omar Khan knows, and of course Rooney and Tomlin. But yeah, I get the thinking that, what the hell are they doing? Because you're looking at a lost season and certainly a team that on paper is not better than the year before or the year before that or the year before that. And those seasons were either, crawling to a playoff appearance at the end, losing right away, or, not nearly being a contender. I'm kind of surprised with how many options are on the wide receiver market that are so, when you look at Keenan Allen, Tyler Boyd, Amari Cooper, and now Gabe Davis. And that's a fair point as well. And Amari Cooper has been somebody that has been tied to the Steelers and brought up a little bit now post Pickens rumors. He's not nearly going to command what he would have been 2 or 3 years ago. Some of those players you can get for a little cheaper than you would like. Obviously Tyler Boyd is somebody that was in Steeler rumors months and months ago. He's somebody that obviously Pittsburgh would love to have. There's certainly the connection there and the hometown flavor there. And that would be an interesting addition. But he maybe would be a higher price tag than some of these others. Keenan Allen's a veteran. He's very, very consistent. And I actually liked if he would have stayed with Harbaugh, and the Bears thing didn't really work out there with Caleb Williams. But that would be kind of something that I could see make sense if they don't have to pay tons to make this clear. Part of the reason why Pickens was moved, in addition to kind of them being sick of him. But that wouldn't be it. If he was a productive force and was a wide receiver one, they'd deal with it for a bit longer. They did deal with AB for a long period of time before it came to a head and he kind of forced his way out. But Keenan Allen would be solid. I mean, some of those guys would be solid, and they certainly would help DK Metcalf at least not get the double coverage, but they're not going to pay big money. It's not going to be a long-term deal. It's not going to be big money. It's not going to be a high price tag. So when you look at that list there that Cole brings up there on X, Davis, Amari Cooper, maybe. And if you get Keenan Allen on a cheaper situation because he's a vet and he's looking for a situation for him to keep on going, then those guys maybe make some sense. They got to do something, you would imagine. They're not going to just fully outright tank, even though some fans would like that this year and not even try. They can there are receivers on the market. They can do something, and they can do something with even just a cheaper signing without even having to work a major trade. So that's very, very true. Again, Mike Asti here, mic drop on Believe in Sirius XM, reacting to what everyone else is reacting to on this beautiful spring day here in May. The Steelers trade George Pickens, middle of the week Wednesday, not during the draft. Again, maybe could have got more during the draft. Don't even get what they got for Claypool. That's weird. They don't get enough for him. I get that thinking, but they never were. Inconsistent on the field and a headache off of it. It leads you to this. It leads you to third round and pick swaps. That's a situation. We'll see what he is in Dallas. Obviously, the Instagram cryptic posts and blowing routes and showing up late will be covered and scrutinized even more in Dallas and become national conversations even more than they were in Pittsburgh. If all of that continues, he will have a better quarterback in Dak Prescott and a better offensive line. But what I want to add on to this too, and I kind of alluded to, this does make the Steelers less attractive for Aaron Rodgers. Like if I'm Aaron Rodgers and I look at this, I would absolutely say, I'll just retire. I get wanting to end on a better note. I get being a legend and being sour on the end with New York and feeling like you were hurt. And then a new regime came in, and even though they did everything you wanted prior, that Glenn was a little bit rude in the meeting, according to what Aaron Rodgers said, and maybe they should have called him instead, dragging him out there. And I get, you actually were more productive than some give you credit towards the end. Your overall numbers were okay. I get all of that, but if you're Aaron Rodgers, your options are the Steelers or retire. The Vikings are not bringing you in. They're not bringing you in. They're in the J.J. McCarthy business now, and if they do bring you in, they're screwing McCarthy. It would be funny to have a Packers legend go to the Jets and then end up with the Vikings again, like happened with Brett Favre when you, Aaron Rodgers, complained about Favre waffling so much. And I also get, despite Aaron Rodgers being annoying, that, he is all the power, kind of leverage if they do care about this season. And I also, and reason in the world to take his good old time. I get at his age, he didn't want to show up to rookie minicamp, and he wanted to let this linger. And when Favre went to the Vikings, even though everyone knew he wanted to be there the whole time and didn't even want to go to the Jets, that didn't happen until August, so he could just have the whole summer off. I get all of that thinking, and maybe you could step in and still get somewhat production. And I totally feel that Aaron Rodgers, even in 2025, with nothing in the offseason, with no work, etc., would be an upgrade to what the Steelers have had in recent years with Fields, Russell Wilson, Mason Rudolph, Trubisky, Kenny Pickett, the end of Ben. The last 5 or 6 years, Rodgers now would likely still be an upgrade from what they've had. Certainly the last couple years if you want to debate the end of Ben. But they're not going to win this year anyway. He's still 41. You're not going to take the Steelers to a Super Bowl, which if you're Aaron Rodgers, the numbers are there, the MVPs are there, you're a Hall of Famer, guaranteed. You've won a championship, even though it's many moons ago. You've had a rough go in the postseason. The criticism is that when you had top seeds, you disappointed and you didn't even play well in the playoffs. So you're certainly the opposite of Tom Brady stepping up his game in the postseason. And Maybe your Jets team wasn't as stacked as, say, his Bucks team was, Peyton Manning's Broncos team, as far as Vikings team. You could argue all of that. They were certainly helped by being on great teams that were loaded for them when they had their big years in their 40s. But nonetheless, you're a shell of your former self. You're going to have better production with the Steelers have had, but you're not going to win big. And if you can't win big and get another ring, you're not really helping your legacy. Maybe it's ending on a better note. It'll be better. People will forget the Jets a little bit because you did get hurt that first year. But and it'll be fun and interesting to cover. It'll make shows like this one pop. I mean, a lot to discuss. So the journalist in me, the media personality in me, the host in me, come aboard. Come aboard. Let's talk about it all season long, all fall and winter. But if you're Aaron Rodgers and you can't win that second championship, you can't go for it, you can't even have a deep playoff run. These are all things that just are not going to happen in Pittsburgh in 2025. You're not a long-term investment. They're not going to do a long-term thing with you because of your age. Duh. Just retire. Just be done. The Jets don't want you anymore. No other teams are really in rumors, nor do you make sense. The Vikings are not going to do it even later if you're holding out hope for that, and they shouldn't. Just go to J.J. McCarthy now after they didn't, bring back Darnold. And the Steelers are just not nearly as attractive as before. I always knew they were going to ship off Pickens. As I said it, again, the theme of the show. I was right. Sorry, not sorry. But the Steelers also are not ready to go for it right now. They're not in win now mode. They always say they are. They always kind of are. Maybe they're crawled to that winning record and do what they always do under Tomlin. That's why he's a Hall of Fame coach, even though I've also been on record that he should have been fired years ago. And that, no head coach should get a lifetime appointment, and many Hall of Fame coaches get fired. Look at the Penguins with Sullivan. You fire a coach, he gets hired in 5 minutes, and they're not sorry about the move at all. He won championships with the Penguins, 3 straight years not making the playoffs. That dissipated, it got tired, it didn't work anymore, and he's gone. So they had no problem with a rival of theirs scooping him up and moving on. It's a different sport. I get it. But even the NFL, the Eagles moved on from Andy Reid. They're going to celebrate him. He was a legend there. He then went on and got a dynasty with the Chiefs, and they also won a couple without him. It worked out for both sides. Tomlin's a future Hall of Famer, but it should have happened already. But they may crawl to a winning record nonetheless because he is a good coach. But yeah, if Bill Parcells, Brett Favre, Boomer Esiason, Ronnie Lott, Art Monk, and so many others couldn't avoid the Jets' plague of failure, it shouldn't impact Rodgers. Rodgers is a Hall of Famer. I mean, he's a Hall of Famer. He's a top 10 QB of all time, 4-time MVP. He does have the championship, even though it's many years ago. Winning a title is hard. Not many quarterbacks throughout the history of the game have multiple. It is a team sport. Eli Manning having 2 and him having 1 does not mean that Eli Manning in any way was a better quarterback over that time. He certainly didn't have a better career, and it was proven. I wrote about it, and it came true. They didn't even get the Hall of Fame on the first ballot. There were reasons why. Aaron Rodgers is going to walk in the door to Canton on the first try, no matter how annoying he is with comments politically or otherwise, or just different arrogance and personality, issues he may have. I think he's a narcissist, to be honest, without a diagnosis there and a degree to do so. But he's a Hall of Famer, and that's part of my point. Why do the Steelers mess? Why get hurt? Why have another reason why, okay, now you suck again, or the team doesn't go anywhere, even if you're good? It's all about team success for Rodgers to increase his legacy, and that's fair, unfair, the situation. So just be done. And I think it'd even be better for the Steelers. You go with Mason Rudolph. Maybe you win 8 games. Maybe you win 7. Maybe you get to 9. You're not going to make a deep run in the playoffs. You'll lose right away, or maybe you just fall out and you don't get in. And then you go get that guy the next year in the draft. Maybe you groom Will Howard. Maybe you love him somehow. And you don't have to have a top 5 pick to get that QB. We've seen franchise QBs be later in the first round, be later picks, Lamar Jackson, for example. But it's easier when you have the early round pick. So if that happens, so be it. It never has happened to the Steelers under Tomlin, but if it happens, so be it. And I wouldn't mess with the Steelers. I wouldn't touch the Steelers. I don't think the Steelers are that attractive of a destination if you're in Rodgers, unless you just really, really want to play. But I think it might be best for Rodgers and the Steelers to just have this not freaking happen. Again, mic drop here on Believe, Sirius XM. Wasn't going to do a long one here. Just want to give my reaction and let you guys know that I was right, and mic drop that to everybody out there. But now seeing activity here in the chat. By the way, not going to give any WVU talk here on this show. Obviously, I cover West Virginia professionally. Always get that, even when I talk Steelers, Penguins, Pirates, or whatever on the national scene. Going to leave that be. Go to WV Sports now for my coverage for the West Virginia side of things, and even Mountaineer Report for that show that is all WVU related. That is also available everywhere you get your podcasts. What changes do you think help the Steelers improve? Well, again, I don't think there's really anything they legitimately can do to contend this season. Legitimately, Rodgers can come in. They can bring in Keenan Allen, Amari Cooper, and I don't see the Steelers winning a Super Bowl, which is what the fans want. They want that playoff win. I totally get it. I don't see that happening this year. Now, if you bring in Amari Cooper and Keenan Allen, you bring in one of those receivers, I think you do replace George Pickens, at least for 1 year. Pickens was inconsistent, and there were many issues with his production, even though he would give you big plays. They can too. So it might be a lateral move production-wise if you do bring in somebody like Amari Cooper, who's still young enough to give you something and maybe has something left in the tank. I do think number one priority for the Steelers to not have a really awful year and to try for this season to be good and to be better and to improve, as you put it, is to get a receiver. They got to get a number two receiver that is a bit of a veteran that can provide some comfort and allow the DK Metcalf to not command just a pure double team and having no chance with double coverage. That is what they need to do. They also need to help the ground game, but maybe Warren steps up and becomes that guy. But all on him is certainly a bit risky, and that was the conversation in recent years when Najee Harris was still there. They even need more defensively. I mean, I even wrote about how I wouldn't have minded if they trade TJ Watt and just bring in a haul for him, because they could get a haul for him like they didn't get with Pickens and then fully rebuild. They're never going to do that, and fans would freak out, and he's a future Hall of Famer and a stud, but he misses games, and is he going to get better? His sack production has actually gone down in recent years. Cam Hayward's like a fine wine, but when will that finally run out and go dry? He's not going to be great forever. And I honestly kind of wish, as a Cam Hayward guy, I love him, love being around him, love covering him, that he gets on a team that can really win right now and get him a ring. He came after that success and didn't get one. Year after Super Bowl appearance was Cam Hayward a Steeler. And it's just not been that since, with some postseason underperformances, disappointments when they had the Killer Bees, and then, of course, the recent years. He's a leader. He's borderline Hall of Fame himself, certainly Steelers legend. But you wish more for him in terms of contender. Secondary needs heavily improved. Beanie Bishop, I like, obviously covered him at WVU, but is he really like your leader of the secondary for the future, despite some big plays last year? They need more there for sure. What they need to do, number one, is get a number two receiver, 100%. And forget who it was, but yeah, the names mentioned, there are enough of those guys. They're going to do something. At the very least, Alan Lazard, they're going to do something, and that might signal Aaron Rodgers. And what I would do, and maybe this will kind of be a final point here, I did also allude to this. I said Aaron Rodgers shouldn't come. I think he should just retire for his legacy. And I think it might even be best if the Steelers don't mess with Aaron Rodgers on the field, even though I love talking about it on shows and otherwise. Just in general, for me, it'll be fun. It'll be fun to cover. It'll be interesting for sure. But I don't think it necessarily helps them on the field. But what they probably should do at quarterback, separate from the wide receiver moves and what they need to do otherwise, because they can't repair it all and get it all this offseason. The draft is now done. I do also think they had a solid draft. Separate from the wide receiver conversation and not trading Pickens, I think they had a solid draft for sure. I like the Steelers picks. They need a lot. They got a lot of high value. I like what the Steelers did. And I didn't think they were going to, take Shedeur Sanders as early as they were. I think there were question marks there. I didn't predict 5th round, but I didn't think he was a first round future of the franchise either. So I don't mind the Steelers, passing on Shedeur Sanders continuously. You get a dominant pass rusher. You really needed to help the pass rush. You get that. So I think the Steelers had a fine draft. But aside from receiver and other spots, they still need to improve for just 2025. They should bring in Kirk Cousins. He's much younger, 36 instead of 41. Hell, I would have brought in Geno Smith, to be honest, but that didn't happen. He's back with Pete Carroll, and that's probably a good situation for him in his last couple years. But that would have maybe needed more. And I get the salary. I know you want to pay it all for the Falcons, who probably should have never signed him, especially when they drafted a first-round quarterback weeks later, and Penix is the guy there. He now proved it, but it makes the Kirk Cousins signing just a complete waste of money. But he's recently been a Pro Bowl quarterback. I'm not saying he's going to walk in and lead you on this amazing run. I don't think having Kirk Cousins means you're a Super Bowl contender or a conference contender, but his production will be similar to what Aaron Rodgers would give you. If you can get him and work out the deal and not have it be where you just throwing checks to the Falcons and on Kirk Cousins, then you bring him in, and I think there could be something left there. He's a solid bridge option to then a guy you will draft, or Will Howard if it works out, or whatever. That type of veteran presence. He's also very mature. He's willing to mentor. He says all the right things. He's not in drama. He was visibly upset about drafting Penix, which makes sense the time after signing him. Maybe he was told something else in a bill of goods, but he said all the right things. He was very polite in press conferences. He's not going to throw up a cryptic message. He's a pro's pro. He's had a solid career. No, he's not a Hall of Famer. No, maybe you could argue he wasn't as good in Minnesota as his numbers suggest because of the coaching staff and what they've done after him and what he's not done after that. But maybe he should have stayed, and what Sam Darnold even did there. But still, he can be solid. We went over who's available on the wide receiver market in terms of who. We go back to it there. So the Keenan Allens of the world, the Amari Coopers of the world, Gabe Davises of the world. I would say again, as I brought up earlier, a Keenan Allen would be a nice veteran that I think would be a perfect fit that Mike Tomlin would love. Do I think that's going to happen? I don't know. Depends on what his value really would command. But that would be a perfect scenario for a vet that could actually swing a game or two for you, help you win now at least, even though they're not going to win big probably. That would be a nice presence with DK Metcalf. A lot of Pittsburgh people, of course, certainly Pitt fans, even high school. I mean, Whippeal, Tyler Boyd would be a favorable addition, and he is a solid player for sure. I would never say that adding Tyler Boyd would be bad. And then Amari Cooper, maybe something left in the tank, former big play guy, a little bit rough the last couple of years. We'll see. I think they are available. They could fit. There are other names out there. The receiver market still has guys and still has things that can be done, and that should be a priority. Fix QB, get a veteran QB, forget Rodgers, bring in Kirk Cousins. This year is not going to be a title year anyway. Maybe you go with Mason Rudolph if you have to. What's the difference? 1 or 2 wins. Bring in that wide receiver number 2 so it's not just double coverage all over in DK Metcalf and kind of ruin even his individual season. Help on the ground game, help on O-line, help D-line. I like the draft, but the Steelers need a lot more help secondary, which they also tried to do, of course, in the draft. So the moral of the story, I was right. The Steelers moved George Pickens. They were never going to pay big money to 2 wide receivers. They were sick of the headache that he would provide. His production did not match the headache that he eventually created. He was a bit of a malcontent in terms of showing up late, getting arrogant, not working on the route tree training camp, caring about the big play, being upset at the QB situation, which admittedly all the fans are too, but still didn't help things, and blowing routes and causing interceptions and being kind of lazy at times. All of that happened. All of it's been reported. All of it's known. All of it's true. But if he was killing it on the field, and they thought he was a clear wide receiver 1 and not a good wide receiver 2 likely, who most of the Steelers wide receiver cast-offs have been at a ceiling afterwards, then they probably would have kept him and had another year of this, but they were never going to pay big money to 2 guys. So they made their decision when they brought in DK Metcalf. They were done with George Pickens. They weren't going to pay the two guys big money. They found a trade. Yeah, it's not tons of value. The Cowboys got desperate, and the Cowboys right now might be a playoff team again. I'm not saying they're going to go ahead and win a title, but Dak Prescott's a better QB than Pickens has had. They have a better O-line, and now they have 2 receivers. Do they do it in the future and pay those 2 guys? I don't know, but Pickens is maybe in a better situation there to have that big year and step up. But the Steelers were done, and they weren't going to pay big money to 2 guys. So that was inevitable. And as I told you, the Steelers moved on from George Pickens. That'll do it for this edition of the show. Check in with Mic Drop everywhere you get your podcasts, of course, powered by the Believe Network and available on SiriusXM. You can also find me everywhere on social media at Mike Asti 11, of course. Thanks to those of you who chatted along on X, on YouTube, wherever. Find me, subscribe even to my personal YouTube channel, which is just my name right now. Maybe I'll branch out the shows. I've been dumping stuff there. I don't fully promote it as much as maybe I should or could, but feel free to subscribe. Convince me to do a lot more with that YouTube channel. And once again, because this episode and this show and the theme of this program is Mike Asti dropping the mic on here being right about George Pickens, I will give you one last more. I was right. And admittedly, I'm wrong sometimes. I'm not always right, but on this, on George Pickens, I was right. So I dropped the mic on being right about George Pickens. Again, find Mike Drop everywhere you get your podcasts. I appreciate everybody joining in and onward and upward because the Steelers drama, the Steelers conversation, the intrigue around the Pittsburgh Steelers, it just never sleeps. And it will continue all through 2025 until what a scene that'll be. The Steelers draft that franchise quarterback of the future in Pittsburgh, with the backdrop of Pittsburgh, the draft in Pittsburgh. It might make a rough 2025, but that might make a real special scene the Steelers fans will remember in the future for the next decade. So as much as this episode here was about me bragging and maybe annoying some, because again, I was right, brush my shoulders off on Pickens, I'll leave you with that positivity. Imagine that scene. You have to put a year in that's going to suck probably to get there. But 2026, the draft in Pittsburgh, it's going to be rocking. It's going to be packed. It's going to be fans all over the street, bridges, rivers, stadiums. A warm day in the city, you hope. It'll be great for the city and for the market. And to then get that quarterback of the future that they have not been able to put on the field since Ben, when that is the major position of need and problem position since a Hall of Famer retired, 100%. That would be a great scene that would be remembered for years if that guy ends up leading them to another promised land, because they've been there before, but it might be a while before they get there again.